versus even during winter. This is a picture of one of the medical camps that we did. My brother was sitting here. We did it in a camp, and we honestly had no idea how many people would show up. We were expecting 30, 40, 50 people. 450 people walked through our clinic in 6 or 7 hours while we were there. And most of them were women and children. And it's a really interesting picture. If you look at that woman, she's wearing sneakers. I don't know if it's Nikes or what, but it's pretty interesting. Now, this is a photograph we took. We invited everyone for a group photo end of the day. And there's a reason why I'm showing this picture. What is unique about this photograph compared to this picture when I said 80% of the people who showed up out of 450 were women and children? Mostly men showed up, right, in the end, for the credit. So how can we help? Now I've kind of walked you through multiple disaster communities, things that we've done. So how can we help these post-disaster communities after spending billions and billions of dollars in disaster relief effort? Well, the answer is we cannot help them. We truly can't. They have to help themselves. Okay, that's the key point. The moment we bring that notion that we are not the saviors, things will be a lot better. Okay, we can be the moderators, we can be the catalysts, but we are not their saviors. It has to be them. And the key individuals in those communities will always remain women, no matter how you look at it. Okay, if we can empower them socially, not only economically, because there's more to do with this than economics. We have to empower them socially and economically, and I'm going to talk briefly more about how that works. That will truly become community leaders. They will take the whole community and they will rise with them. All we gotta do is to just select a few champions out of that group, give them the tools for engagement, and let them see what they do with it. And I'll show you some examples. This is one of the young ladies who I got to meet and know when I spent 2 or 3 days with my team in a very remote village in Nepal, in Sindhupal Chowk district, way in the mountains close to Tibet. She was born right here. We are standing at about 8,000 feet right now, right there. Top of the mountain, beautiful, not too far from Tibet. Right behind that monastery that fell. Her father was the high priest of the village. Her father died at the spot where she was standing because her home was right in front of it, and it fell right on him. She said, I was born here, my father was born here, and this was dangerous ground because of the aftershocks and everything. So we were talking about, at this time we were discussing, would you want to move? Not only she didn't want to move from there, she wanted to rebuild the monastery and she wanted to serve her people. So imagine if we were able to harness our energy for the long term. Things will be very different. So that's where the idea for 848 came from, which is a solution that I'm here to deliver for all the problem that I've just shown you folks. And it dawned on me that we can keep giving them a handout, but if we just lend our hand and give them tools of engagement and let them get the feeling that they're getting on their feet, and I'll show you how that kind of works in my mind that we've been working on this project, that might change things for the good for the long term. So the 848 projects, which I'm going to give a little more detail shortly, is we need to create more sustainable and scalable. So they have to be able to sustain themselves, and they should be able to replicate it in multiple other communities, in these post-disaster communities, by empowering these local women. That's what 848 project will stand for. Our goals? Well, we really want to create role models in those communities who will eventually become community leaders. And they're among those local women through process of mentoring and stewardship, through remote dialogue. So what does social empowerment mean? Well, social empowerment to those communities mean, well, we will help them with education and teaching self-worth and gender equality. As much as we take a lot of these things for granted in our communities, they can be taboo subjects there. They're subjects that may not be talked about. But if you bring education and teaching of a woman about self-worth and gender equality, and it doesn't take a whole lot. It's right there. You just gotta scratch the surface and they'll start talking about it. Economical empowerment through vocational training and small business setups. And above all, community building. When you take about 8 or 10 different women in a community, get them together in a business, it turns into a corporate. They can lead the community together. So how we can all bring them together on the same platform, whether you're doing through healthcare, education, or whatever the needs are for that community. And above all, we shouldn't be forgetting about disaster planning, because these women will remain like that girl, Chandra, 22-year-old, they will remain there. What are the elements that we can add on to disaster planning and relief effort for those people out there? So the structure of this 848 project works and looks something like this. And I see there are some bankers in, they'll get really excited about loans. So it's microfinancing and interest-free loans, which are basically in a process of, they've been waived off eventually. They're mentors who are based out of USA, who are independent and successful professional women leaders, who mentor these women in these remote areas. These loans are waived as individuals contribute to a community fund, which is called 848 Fund. And I'll show you how that works. We utilize and partner existing healthcare and infrastructure, so we're not really spending a lot of money building bricks and mortars, but we're investing in human capital. That's where the money goes. Our initial focus right now for this project is healthcare and education. And subsequently, we're going to talk more about education and natural resources once the project gets more mature and the community is more aware of how things work. So we have 8 mentors in different states. These are all independent women who are successful leaders. They are truly an embodiment of women empowerment individually. And I've gone through a process of talking and getting one from each state. And London is not a state of the United States, but someone lives there, so it happens to be that. So they become mentors to these 8 women who live in an extremely remote, post-disaster community. But they do have a passion to bringing change in these communities. We select those 8 women out of 20, 30, or 40 different applications that were laid out. And this is how we then structure them. They become 848. So 8 mentors here mentoring 8 women over there in a remote community. They get micro loans, interest-free, $1,000 a year, which is a lot considering that an average income in those communities is $100 per month household. So if somebody would have come in and given you an interest-free loan for the year's worth of what your husband's been making, there's a lot you can do with that. So these 8 women, this is a very interesting graph. If you look at these, through what they're doing is they're starting their own businesses, getting empowered, not financially also, but socially, becoming leaders in their communities. They're being mentored from 8 successful entrepreneur leaders, women from the United States and United Kingdom. Once they're getting on their feet and they have income generation, they're putting into this 848 community fund. And if you look at those yellow graphs on the left, where the money that comes into the fund is then put into resources, which is healthcare and education needs of that community. So it just kind of flows together in that community. I'll give you one of the examples of vocational training that we've been starting to do. And we have a project which is mostly community midwife training, because there are no doctors and nurses in those communities. So there's a program which is started by one of our partner organizations where we're sending these women to get trained. It's an 18-month course. By the end of the 18 months, they become really very highly specialized in taking care of maternal and child needs during the childbirth in these highly remote access areas. And that's the reason why I mentioned some of the statistics about one of the biggest killers of, in those communities. The idea is to bring them empowerment. They become community leaders. So if you're delivering somebody's child and you do it successfully, you have a whole different respect in the community for the community. This is what social empowerment comes to be. They become service providers, they become community activists, they become educators, and they become community leaders. So you've truly taken a girl or woman like Chandra, who just saw a 22-year-old in that community, and you have certainly turned by sending her through this course into a community leader. Now she has a voice not only for herself, but the rest of the community, especially the women and children in that community. It overall raises the awareness of healthcare needs in that community, and by creating these role models who are truly embodiment of women empowerment. Now, this program, which is currently in place through our foundation, is working with our multiple organizations on the ground in that country. And this example is from Pakistan, where these women are sent for 18-month course to become certified midwives. And they get certification. It costs per candidate $5,000, which is given as a loan for 18 months for those to those women, which is later on waived off, because once they come back to their communities, they start their own private practice. And it's over the last multitude of years, since they've been doing this project, that organization, they've seen a lot of these women, when they come back to those communities, their actually average income is twice as much as their male counterparts or their husbands in those communities. So it's a whole different game for them. The other ideas of vocational training that we've looked into is solar energy technicians. There's an organization that's called Barefoot College. It's actually in India, and it's been working for the last almost 65 to 70 years, where they select these grandmas. Okay, and in many of the villages, the grandmothers are not that old. They're fairly young, in their mid-40s. But they select them because they've gone through the responsibility of their household. And it's called Barefoot College in Rajasthan. And they are sent there for a 6-month course where and imagine, these women are selected from very remote areas. They don't know how to write, they don't know how to read. Okay, they go there for 6 months. By the time they come back, they're becoming solar energy technicians. And they have a workshop, and then they work towards communities' energy needs. And while they're gone for 6 months, the community gets together and builds a whole workshop for them. So they come back, and then they have these solar-powered stoves, they have electricity for their schools and their households, and it's a very dynamic project. If you ever get a chance, take a look at their website. Cattle and goat farming, pig farming, fish farms, textile and handicraft, which is very interesting. I'm going to give you an example of one of our partner organizations now who's been doing it and done an amazing job. And you can also invest into cash crops in multiple of these areas. Now, so what does an 8-for-8 looks like? Well, these are 8 American professional women. They're working together as mentors to these 8 women in a very remote community to socially and economically empower them. This truly is not a philanthropic venture. It's actually a socioeconomic initiative for these communities, because that's what we need. You know, so it's truly not giving them a handout, but truly lending them our hand and our expertise and letting them get on their feet. So this is an example of one of the organizations that I got to know recently. Its work is in Colombia, South America. Started by a young woman out of college. She is from London, who's now one of our mentors and part of 8-for-8. She went back to Colombia, the country where she was born and grew up. And she spent about a year living with some indigenous villages and getting to do her thesis. End of her thesis, she realized that it's all about what I just talked about, empowering those women to change that community. So she started this company where she basically gave them loans and got them started making these really amazing bracelets and bags and turned into a luxury brand. This is what it looks like right now. These bags are selling for $200-300, and this is a lower price tag for a lot of them. That truly changed the way that community looks a year after she started the program. So this is a luxury brand out of London that was started in South Colombia in very remote villages. Now, before I end my talk, there's always a behind the scenes scene in a lot of movies. So I'm going to take you behind the scenes of this presentation. So that was me when I was getting ready yesterday for this talk. And I had a smirk on my face and I took a selfie. And not because I was looking good, which obviously I am, but the fact that I had an idea. So I was talking to my friend Marco, who was getting my hand. I was like, Marco, how about we go together and I take you to one of these remote villages, which are extremely remote, and you teach those women how to cut men's hair. Remember, a lot of these areas, men don't have access to cutting their hair. They do it themselves, and they do a pretty job, you know? Or they travel to remote towns and pay premium prices, you know, compared to Pocatello. So I said, if we go there and we teach these women how to cut men's hair, it truly will change the dynamics. I mean, imagine a woman with a single blade razor standing at the head of a man. What's more empowering than that, right? So that was a behind-the-scene moment for me. But truly, this was a photograph that my brother and I were in this camp in Chitral that I took, that this whole presentation kind of evolved with. When this woman came up to us, shook our hand, and right now she's in one of those community midwife projects down south in Karachi for an 18-month course of becoming someone. So I think this one photograph truly captures, these are our physicians who are there, and I think this truly captures the essence of this presentation. So I think I'm going to stop right here. If you guys have any questions.
Yes, I'm wondering about how do the men feel when these women are taking over the village? Do the men feel, like we're no good anymore because I can't go out and hunt and stuff, so the women are taking over our lives?
I think it's high time men should realize we've done a pretty bad job in running this world and this planet. So the sooner they figure that out, the better it is. That's a great question. There's initially some hesitation, but when they, like I said, once you empower them, you're not only letting them earn a living, you're actually teaching them self-worth, gender equality, and that changes the dynamics. I was having the discussion with my wife the other day. I was like, so what if after the child is born, the father comes in, takes over the child, and that's a pretty norm phenomena for him to wake up every night, feed the kid, do the whole thing, change the diapers, blah, 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 right? Shouldn't be any different while the mother has to go to work the next morning. We have to understand gender roles and where this whole thing started. Those communities are more acceptable for most part in understanding that, but we have to give them the tools. So you're not just educating the women, you're also educating the men at the same time. Especially when she's cutting his hair and she's got a razor in her hand, he ain't got a chance.
In the book, I Am Malala, she talks a lot about her efforts and her father's efforts for educating women and the challenge, the opposition from the Taliban. How do we help them fight that?
You got to understand, this is a recent phenomenon. The whole Taliban story was created not too long ago, and it's a very isolated phenomenon in certain communities. Like South America, there are no Talibans, luckily, right? This part of the Chitral, there's none. The answer to that question is, it's a global war. It's a global war of identity, religion, ideology, whatever you want to call it. The way to really fight is to keep doing what we're doing, is to keep keep educating ourselves on the needs of those communities and helping them stand on their feet. So I cannot just go there in a Taliban-occupied community and build a school, because that's been done, as you know, with the other project, and they will bomb it down. But it has to be working with the people. We have to keep working on education. Taliban is a whole different story,
So thank you for your talk. This is really inspiring, and I think you give great examples of grassroots efforts. I was wondering, in your numerous projects, has there ever been any government support or obstruction in these areas?
That's a great question. The government always looks at you, no matter what part of the world you're in, why are you doing this, right? When Naeem and I were in that, we were haunted by intelligence agencies. So they always have that idea of why you're doing this. So give you a simple example. One of our team members, before we got there, wanted to make sure we have internet. Okay, because there was no internet because of a very sensitive area of that part of Pakistan. So he bought a dish, he's setting up a dish internet in that area where we are right now, and he's talking to his guys who are setting it up. It's like, why don't you point towards Afghanistan, because the satellite is there and we'll get reception. The guy who heard that, so it thought we were Afghanistan spies, or what be the case. So they shut us down, like drastically. Within a day, all our efforts were shut down because of the reasons. So the key to work in any community is you have to start with the government. No matter how resistance you get, what it be the case, you have to start with them, because there's always a point where you can come together. So afterwards, we learned with the mistakes, and we went back, and my uncle, who's sitting here in the audience, spent hours dealing with the local government officials, but we get through it.
I have two questions. First is, I've noticed you're very well dressed, and those shoes are the dopest I've ever seen.
They are, right?
Where do I get a pair?
No, not here.
And then the second question is, I'm kind of curious, you're focusing a lot on this 8 for 8 program. I'm kind of curious if these 8 women, if there's any concern of them dropping out after the program, or let's say they come back after their months of training and maybe they have influences from fathers, husbands, brothers saying, we don't support you in this. Do they stop, or is there any concern with that, or is it pretty consistent as far?
There's always a chance that they can change their minds, right? But it's always how you select them in the first place, right? I mean, even at ISU, I'm sure there's some dropout rates, right? After all the scholarships and everything we do. So there's always going to be a risk. But for most part, they will push through it. Especially when you select a woman who has got children and kids to feed. And she's been in a community where now you're not only giving her tools of engagement in terms of work and money, but you really taught her self-worth and gender equality. You've taught her that when you talk to your husband, you can look it straight in his eyes and you can demand certain things. You know, that changes dynamics. I've been married long enough to know that, trust me.
Fahim, I've noticed that most of your emphasis has been in small towns, remote areas. What about the efforts in great big cities like Delhi and the air pollution that's going on there, and the women there too?
I think Dr. Rafi Ahmed is a better person to answer because he's from India. One of the initiatives that our foundation has, and if you ever get a chance, you should come to this, not that far from here. We are trying to bring that to Pocatello. Is we sponsor a film festival called Family of Women Film Festival. And that's where I'm going with Delhi right now, and women. Delhi has been known for a multitude of attacks on women, and there's really an undercurrent of that anti-women rape sentiment there. So we recently sponsored a documentary called India's Daughter, which was sponsored, and the film festival just finished in Sun Valley last week. It's very deep-rooted. It's cultural, and again, if you look at the grassroots of all of this, it starts from the household. Okay, so I have 2 daughters and a son, right? And their ages 9 through 14. So I not only have to teach my daughters to be strong and stand up for their rights, but more importantly, I need to teach my son how to respect the other gender and women. Okay? So if that education and training is missing in a household, whether you're in Pocatello, Idaho, or whether you're in Delhi, eventually the environment would lead to situations like what you're referring to, how women are treated on the streets of Delhi, or some parts of Pakistan, or even in the United States, for that matter. Okay? So I think the responsibility lies in our hands as parents and institutions, and that's why I showed those statistics about childbirth, because men have equal stake at this fight against gender equality and understanding. I can't talk about pollution, it's a very complicated topic. Yes, Mark?
I wanted to know from you about the nutrition of these people. Are they eating well? And what are they doing to take care of their children, nutrition-wise?
So, that's a great question. Nutrition, for most part, many parts of the world, especially when I went to Nepal, you'll see our sizes are small, compared to other areas. We were in South America, we had a project that we helped out, or we're trying to help out, in Panama. The biggest issue in nutrition is the nutrition in the first 24 months of your life. Okay? And there are some severe needs, and most of that nutrition is available, but it's a lot of times a lack of education and how they can be fed. I'll give you an example of a project that my wife and my kids and I visited in Panama, and if you ever get a chance to Google this organization called Nutri Hogar. Nutri Hogar is out of Panama. It's a phenomenal organization they've been trying for the last 20 years, and they focus on clinically severely malnourished kids. And I wish I knew you were going to ask this question, because I have 5 or 10 years. One of the things that they've really realized is that once you deliver someone's baby, okay, in that remote community, you're really a superhero, and you've done it successfully. Especially, I don't know if many of you have seen this ad. There's an ad that used to be on internet and TV. It shows a man in some remote part of India who's walking on his hand for a long time, and finally he gets to a temple, and he's walking on his hands, okay, like hand walking, right, up, down. And he gets to a temple, and then finally he kneels down and stands and prays. And somebody asks him, why are you doing this? He's like, this is I made this pact that once I have a child who crosses this 5th year of life, I will do this as a prayer or what be the case. That was his first child out of 6 who were born who survived the 5th year of life. Okay, if you ever get a chance, Google that ad. It was very, very powerful. So that whole transition for women, so that's how they give them the leadership role in the community. So yeah, I mean, there'll be men who will, raise hands and, create ruckus about it, but for most part, it's a very empowering position for a woman to be in.
Hopefully a simple question, but I'm just curious.
You're gonna hit me hard, Kevin.
Why 8 in particular?
I knew someone was gonna ask why that question. 8 sounds better than 9, more manageable than 10. The reason I got it started was I started my search for something like this locally here. And I kept going back and forth on the numbers. But to me, 8 just sounded right.
And I get the sense that if it could be 800,
Yes.
that might be better. So
Yes.
do you have plans to grow this
Yes,
number?
yeah. So 8 is a small, so most of these communities, remember, are communities where there are 50 households, like Village Yangri has 50 households in Nepal. All 50 households were demolished, they destroyed in the earthquake. We built 12 or 13 homes there now, we still have to build more. So we wanted to keep a number which is manageable for us, but it's also scalable and replicable. So if these 8 women in that village of Yangri or 50 household can do this, then they can go to the neighboring village and teach other 8 women how to do that. And if you multiply it by 10 times, that's how you can get the scalability. So that was a good question. That was a tough one. So I think that's about it, right? Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Oh, you know what? Wait till you see my socks. That's even better.
Oh, I love those.
See?